Like when I think of Paul writing a letter and saying, I'm Paul. What are you doing? Don't do that. Come on, God, this is what God says. Or I'm Paul, good job. But it seems like he's on his back foot here. He's troubled about the Corinthians. He feels like he wants to boast in the Corinthians to boast in him. But now there's this jeopardy and this difficulty that's going on with him. And that's not normally the way I think about Paul's letters, as being like with this anguish and surety, but still he's moving forward with sort of confidence and an effort to try to help them and to save them anyway. All right. Go ahead.
I was struck by the way that Paul talks about prayer in this chapter. So, he says they despaired of life itself, and you remember that God can raise the dead, and they're wanting to be delivered. But he says in verse 11, you also must help us by prayer, so that many will give thanks on our behalf for the blessing granted to us through the prayers of many. So that help us and through the prayers, it just reminds me that he's saying here that prayer is one of the major ways that we help one another, and that God does things through prayer.
That's an interesting verse grammatically. It was kind of hard to understand, but also, it's like your prayers can help make things happen, and I want you to pray and to make things happen. Why? So that everyone can give thanks. Not like so that the problem can be solved, but that when the problem is completely solved, everyone will give thanks, and you're going to help have everyone have joy and thanks when God helps solve this problem. Your prayer is going to help with that. So anyway, all right, so let's go through, some maps. Okay, so here's the missionary journey. You can see Corinth is there. It's an isthmus between Peloponnese in the southwest, and then Athens over there in Achaia. Everybody see Corinth? This thing does not at all touch it doesn't happen. Here's Corinth again. You can see it's a dual port, and then it can go up, both ways. This is a painting of Rome completely destroying Corinth. I hope that things are. Oh, all right. So here's a stoa. I was so impressed by this stoa on the top right. I don't know why. I just was like, that. Apparently, there's a bunch of rooms in the back. It's not just an open place, but there's a lot of administrative buildings, storage places, and everything. And they had the largest stoa, apparently, at the time. Here's the outline. All right. Okay. How much time do I have? We've hit on some good things already. All right, I have about 10 minutes. So first, I'd like to talk about this first verse. So apparently in most of Paul's letters, Paul gives thanks to churches, but here Paul says, blessed be God, instead of I thank you. And this is a little bit of a difference. It seems that most commentators believe that he believes that even though he's received good word, that the Corinthians have received his painful letter well, and that Titus saw that they had good receptivity to that. There's still some healing that needs to take place, and healing is kind of slow. So he doesn't want to sort of thank them yet, but he wants to kind of hold off on that until he can go and be with them, and there can be sort of a more complete restoration. So if we go to which one is it? So there's this verse for 2 Corinthians 1:5. It's rendered differently by Garland. He says that there's some interesting language here. He says, "For just as the sufferings of Christ flow over into our lives, so also through Christ our comfort overflows." And he says that this word "overflows" has sort of some context in commerce and economics that has to do with sort of like a spreadsheet and tallying, and particularly of surplus. And he says that, my sufferings have met a certain threshold, but my comfort is a surplus. It's beyond the sufferings I have, right? So if you kind of think about it, if there's sufferings and there's comfort, but it turns out it's a net negative, and the comforts that you receive weren't even worth the suffering you went through, that there might be some sort of questions about why did God put you through sufferings if you come out the other side lower than when you started, or worse off? But here he says, no, actually, if you kind of tally it, the comforts are so much greater, with whatever sort of comfort points you would have to stipulate exist or whatever. And this is the way that God is actually working. This is how we can justify or talk about why I'm suffering and why you're suffering this way. And that actually, there's also an emphasis here on when the Corinthians are comforted, Paul is comforted. And there's this connection between the two because some of Paul's sufferings are for this jeopardy and unsurety of the Christians, of the Corinthians. And so his suffering and that they're being seen through this difficulty is actually it's sort of like attached to them and drawn from them. Let's keep on going. All right. So there are, as I said, that one of the possible difficulties in Asia, right? We have to sort of understand what this might be. It's not exactly clear what it is, but some people think it was the riot in Ephesus. Some people think that Paul maybe have become fatally ill. Others think that maybe Paul had quite amount of anguish and all this anxiety about the Corinthian church. Also, there was a great opposition from fellow Jews. In fact, we find out that he had such opposition in Corinth that some Jews from Corinth were in Jerusalem when Paul goes to Jerusalem. And these Corinthian Jews get Paul arrested. So this opposition sort of keeps on going and follows him from Corinth to other places. And he says, we felt like we received the sentence of death. But some people think it's unlikely to be an actual, like, some sort of judge in some sort of official capacity. So Paul has some theological and spiritual takeaways. He says he experienced this in order that he might solely rely on God, right? It seems that there's Paul had to eventually come to the point where there's nothing he can do. And through this particular experience, right, you could say, oh, doesn't Paul always have this idea? But he says, like, particularly through this experience taught me to rely on God, and that God is really going to overcome when there's nothing that I can really do anymore. It's completely out of my hands. It taught him that all we have comes from God, and the affliction was so intense that it required God's special intervention. So I want to ask this question. Given what we know about the Corinthian church, why do you think Paul takes so much time to describe this experience and what he learned from it? Why was this important for them to hear?
We've kind of already touched on it, but it seems that the Corinthians maybe didn't really understand suffering in a really robust way because of or at least a lot of them in the church, maybe with the culture of extravagance and wealth and riches, and maybe there were people in the church maybe who weren't understanding the role of suffering in the Christian life, and so that might be why Paul is taking so much time to use this as an opportunity to teach them about that.
Yeah, so it seems like one might say, if the super apostles are attacking Paul for experiencing suffering, and the Corinthians want to experience comfort, and that's a sign of socially being, ascendant, Paul's trying to re-educate them on what suffering means and what they should be thinking about when they see someone suffer. And so he's calling to mind and sort of helping them rethink the idea of suffering, and is not as a negative thing, but as all the things that Paul, you can say, this is what I have gained through this suffering. And maybe you should be ready to suffer because perhaps the Corinthians have suffered for Paul and might be a little bit worn out or thinking they don't want to do it. Instead, you should continue to suffer with me. Okay.
I kind of got a question. Do you think that maybe in the ancient world, in the Gentile world, that they viewed suffering as maybe punishment from the gods, like you're not under the blessing of the gods that you're worshiping. And so, I mean, therefore, if Paul's suffering, maybe God's not happy with him, but, oh, we're prosperous over here, therefore God likes us.
You think that with the city so recently ascendant and continuing to be ascendant, that they would ascribe to the gods their blessings? Yes, yeah, so there's I think a temple to Aphrodite that is very major here in the city of Corinth.
Yeah, if that were culturally what you had grown up with, right? The gods bless those who they take pleasure with. Yeah. And curse those who...
Piety.
Right. And so then if Paul's having a rough time, maybe God's not happy with him.
Yeah.
And they're Gentile history, right? They have Gentile history, not Jewish history.
Well, that's what's happening in Job too. We're all Job's friends. Like, you must have done something wrong, Job. God wouldn't punish anybody to this extent if you didn't have some sin you were hiding. Like,
yes.
You need to confess and get it out. So that's human nature, whether you're Gentile or part of God's covenant people. Also, I just want to, I was remembering that the first epistle reminded us that they were unusual times when Paul was giving all of those suggestions that maybe it's better for you not to get married. So maybe Paul's really sensing that something big is about to happen across the world during this time, right? And it's before 70 AD, I'm
so be prepared. Yeah. It's going to just keep on happening. And you can imagine with all the influx, all the things that they've experienced, like John Carlos talked about, Judaizers and then super apostles, all of these different things, plus these guys that are marrying their mother-in-laws, right? And then no one seems to care, that this city might be like a magnet. Boats come in, boats go out. Roman administration trickles down. There's this era of Roman administration, then the emperor changes that. These things aren't going to stop because you're in Corinth. So you really should become inoculated to it, or you should really become used to it and become resilient.
It seems like the Corinthians are very impressed by lots of kinds of power that maybe have very little to do with the actual power of God, and so you see that all the way in 1 Corinthians, and that continues in 2 Corinthians, I think. So Paul is describing his suffering as a way that he gains comfort and consolation from God. And so whether it's anticipating some of the concerns or questions that are being raised about him, maybe thinking about the super apostles and other kinds of people who show different sorts of power that they're impressed by, either in a Christian sense or in a secular sense. He's demonstrating what he gets directly from God. And unlike those other kinds of power, this is a thing that can be shared. He can receive consolation from God and then give it to the Corinthians, which is different from a lot of the kinds of things that they seem to be impressed by and want to crave, things that can't really be shared and therefore become kind of markers of status. But this is something that he gets from God and he can share and give to them. So there's a kind of authenticity, like this is truly of God because it can be shared and offered to the Corinthians as well.
Yes, there's definitely parallels between Christ and Paul, and then Paul and the Corinthians, and this sharing and this caring about people who are kind of subordinate, but also this relief and this comfort that are all happening. And it seems to be like maybe you're saying a different dynamic than what they're used to in the ancient world. All right. Let's see. So Paul uses the word boast a lot. It's something to be to be aware of here. You see 2 Corinthians. Why is he talking so much about boasting? And it seems that the Corinthians, at least one idea is that they've been boasting in the wrong things. And he's going to say, I boast of my suffering. You think that's something to be ashamed of. Change your idea of what to be proud of. I boast of my fruit, of our endurance, not flashy shows and lording over people. And so you should boast in me, not be ashamed of me, and go to these super apostles. And then lastly, or I think that's all the time actually we have, unfortunately. Anyway, thank you very much. Let me pray for us, and then we can end our session. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you again for this time. Thank you that you have blessed Paul and helped him to endure through difficulty, through anxiety, through suffering. Thank you that he shows us an example of people who are suffering, but suffering for others, suffering as he strives to lift them up, to take them out of jeopardy, to keep them on the straight path, to have union and communion with them. I pray that you'd help us and show us this. I thank you that Paul struggled so much and taught the Corinthians how to be faithful and care for the people who were their teachers, and to not disown those teachers when they became someone who they did not want to associate with, or someone where it was difficult. I pray that you would help us to do likewise and have a great love for those around us and for our pastors.